Hello ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to the Ultimate Doctor Who Marathon. This is the show where I look at every classic Doctor Who story plus a bunch of big finish audio dramas, one episode a day, 7 days a week. Now before we begin, because in 2019, YouTube was caught data mining the information of underage users, therefore violating the Children's Online Privacy Protection Act, or COPPA. They reached a settlement with the United States government, where they implemented new policy meant to dodge responsibility and scapegoat creators. Meaning, I have to ensure that everyone understands that this video is not meant for children. It's not advertised towards kids. It is not. It's not aimed at kids. Doctor Who's a family so that kids can watch, but this video, as with all the videos on my channel are coming at the show, are coming at this from an adult perspective, and therefore may be discussing adult topics, so viewer discretion is advised. But it's the 21st of October 2020, and we're starting a look at the second ever Doctor Who audio released by Big Finish Productions with Phantasmagoria Part 1. Now, interestingly, Phantasmagoria was written by Mr. Mark Gatiss. Yes, the same author who wrote the critically acclaimed novel Nightshade, and would eventually write a lot for the new series. This is one of those things where you had a writer actually getting their start in the expanded universe before moving on to the show before the rival, because this story was released in 1999. It's basically 21 years old. Actually, I think 21 years old to the month that I'm recording this, which makes it interesting, because this is, as their second release, this is actually a really, really interesting idea. The idea is that this takes place on the day that William of Orange, dies in 1702, and you're basically it kind of feels like Gatiss is going for this vibe of a novel from that era. Like, there's a highwayman, there's gambling, and, the Turlo gets attacked right by the end. And it's kind of the same, but this first episode is actually kind of difficult to talk about, not for any bad reasons, but because it's a really standard first episode. It's a story where you have these characters who are, well written, and fun. You have Quincy Flowers, Sir Nicholas Valentine, Jasper Jeek, a bunch of, again, characters with no, they clearly don't have, like, quote-unquote real names. They're caricatures. You know, there's these characters who they don't exactly make a lot of stuff. It also helps that this is kind of minimalist, like really minimalist when you think about it. Like the music score is barely there. What is there is done by Alistair Locke, who I don't want to complain, because Alistair Locke as a composer is actually really good and still works for Big Finish to this day for that reason. But some of these early ones really don't have that interesting of a score, as you can kind of tell, sadly, that this doesn't have an interesting score. Like, you know, there's something so different, at least different with what Gatiss is doing here. Like, Turlough and the Doctor actually make it interesting, because Turlough doesn't, at least in this first episode, doesn't have a great characterization, partially because, again, this is so early in Big Finish's run that you really don't see a lot of development, meaning that a character like like there's a lot there. You know, it's like there's this argument of criticism, of like cricket and why cricket works, and it's okay. Mark Strickson is perfectly giving a good performance, but there just isn't a lot in this episode to really make you think it's there. You know, there's just things that don't work. Really, it just makes this first episode just sort of forgettable and kind of just meh. So I'm actually just gonna have to give part 1 of Phantasmagoria probably just a 5 out of 10? Yeah, 5 sounds right. Okay, it is the 22nd of October 2020. I just finished listening to the second part of Phantasmagoria. So, this is a great example of how to improve a script, but how to kind of make things boring, because this is a script that, by all means, should have been improved quite a bit. What I mean by that is, well, something where you have, you know, characters being characters and being, you know, playing interesting roles and playing around with different things, especially when it comes to the terms of plot. Like the whole idea, of course, being that this entire story builds kind of up and around. It basically builds around the idea of this being where, you know, that the Doctor and Turlough are trying to find their solution and getting themselves something, basically trying to figure out sort of what's going on. You have this Dr. Holywell who's, you know, he's obsessed with the paranormal, so much so that he acts like he could actually explore the paranormal, which of course listeners realize the paranormal normal doesn't exist. Dead bodies show up with a playing card in their pockets. Games seem to be a big theme. Yeah, the Celestial Toymaker's not behind this. So, there's not here's a villain from Classic Who for you guys to be like, remember that villain? I do. I remember that villain really well. Which is, honestly, that's a good thing. Having an over-reliance on a villain from a classic story, isn't what the audio should do. It isn't what the characters should do. It's instead something just very, very, very different, and something where you see exactly what the plot might be able to be and might be able to do, even if it isn't perfect. It's one of those stories where that is in fact a different sort of story. It's not normal, it's just kind of just, here's the plot we're going with for this story, just so we can see something different and something very, very, very different. Very there is a lot of differences and a lot of things where you have the idea of the story built around these characters. Great, like Turlo doesn't lose his memory but gets separated from the Doctor. The Doctor basically tries to do like an actual, I guess, gets involved. It's like, we're gonna do an actual seance, which feels a bit weird, especially considering the Doctor then kind of makes fun of the fact that he's going to be participating in an actual seance, which is something kind of un-Doctor-like, especially for Peter Davison's Doctor. You would think that would be okay. Something so different, and so just out of character. But no, there's a seance. The villain is an alien, it seems, but it doesn't quite know what it wants to be. The villains are just there might be two villains talking to one another with like really bad voice modulators. Again, this is still early Big Finish, so they haven't quite figured out all the kinks yet. And honestly, that's one part that suffers. Though I will say this episode is an improvement. It is more enjoyable. And it is genuinely a lot funnier than the first episode, even if it is still very light on plot and character and moving things anywhere along. Because things don't get moved along at all with this story. It really is a lot of just, okay, here's some things. We're not really moving the plot along. We're just kind of stagnating just a little bit. But it does make for a good episode, even if it's not great. So I'm going to have to give part 2 of Phantasmagoria a 6 out of 10. Okay, it's the 23rd of February 2020. I just finished listening to part 3 of Phantasmagoria, the 3rd episode, and okay, so this is one of those episodes that it's good. It's good, and it leads to a decent cliffhanger, decent-ish, but Phantasmagoria overall has been a story where you don't have enough to really give the story what it needs to work, especially around being this sort of different plot type thing where you have the characters doing their things and the plot being there and being enough of a plot that it's, explainable, but not enough that you get really the sense that this is something that a story can fully embrace or really fully be. It's very much a lot of, okay, here's some, here's our characters doing these things, and these things that need to be done are moving around the plot and moving around everything. You don't entirely get, part of things you don't entirely get to see. Here's a lot of, okay, here's what the plot's going for, here are the things that the story needs to be doing, and here are, all just the general differences and so on and so forth. Instead, you get what's essentially one plot built around these characters, and around Tegan and not even around Tegan, Tegan's no longer here, around Turlo, sort of interacting with this version of London, and not any actual version of London. And this entire episode just sort of builds up to a reveal that is essentially, it's not like a good, amazing, here's this really good reveal that changes everything, and so much stuff is different now. No, it's basically just a reveal that, okay, these characters, the villain, basically every other supporting character has secretly been the villain, just in a different guise that I can't say is well written or even really well executed. It's just sort of like, okay, here's our surprise that the third act villain, that the villain through this entire thing is like 6 different characters, all in different guises, You also don't really get a sense of what the villain wants. Like, there's this kind of interesting-ish section that is, that basically does the sort of Stephen coming back every 30 years or so to I guess, regain his energy is the implication, but it's not actually explain what the villain's doing, or even really what the villain is. The villain is an alien, and this is a story that deals with a whole alien invasion plot, but not in any sort of interesting way that would make you think, one, that would make you really think about what the villain wants, or who the villain really is, or why the villain acts in the way that it does. It really doesn't. It's just alien is alien looking for, I guess, its own sort of food source. But even then, that's vague, and a lot of it's left up to the imagination and specifically the interpretation of the audience. So you don't get to see who the villain is. It's just the idea that the villain is. The villain is this nebulous entity thing, and you don't really have a reason to believe otherwise. Instead, having something just sort of thrown out there, which is very much a weird sort of thing. This is also a story where you don't quite see the effect of writing a story like this, where the story is 4 episodes long, which is fine, is a fine length for a story. But this 3rd episode really makes you feel like this might have worked better as a book in writing. Because it also, the whole vocal modulation between the different characters, they're all played by different performers, essentially playing versions of this entity, and it's not really clear if this entity or this character is all one version of the same person or not. But it's an okay listen, at least. It's not the worst thing I've ever heard, but it's also not amazing, and you have to listen to it to really understand it. No, it's okay. It's good, but it's not great. So I'm just gonna have to give part 3 of Phantasmagoria a 6 out of 10. Okay, it's the 24th of October 2020. I just finished listening to part 4 of Phantasmagoria, the final episode of the story, and just a good final episode. Probably the best of the 4 episodes that we get. This is definitely something different and something very, very, very much a different style of story. We play around with a lot of different things that the story can do. You know, it isn't some great thing. It's just, it's good, and it gets the job done. Like, you're dealing with, of course, a lot of characters, a lot of things in this story that, you know, that you know, it's okay to deal with, and it's okay to be to experience, even if this isn't anywhere near a perfect story or even all that great of a story, because it isn't great. It's very much a this was okay. I've had a lot worse. I've had a lot better. Like, it's just, oh, alien invader in history, and the characters don't quite know how to basically cope with said alien invader. You know, something that there's a lot of bits of the story that, you know, could have been plenty interesting and very, very much something that you're like, okay, cool, we got something new, something exciting, and you know, and all the stories can be like that, but you don't really entirely get that here. You get a lot of more kind of dull, kind of less enjoyable, just sort of there. You know, this is a very weird little thing, where you have the story being a story. You know, it's like, you know, everything just sort of builds to a conclusion where you don't really get to see everything, and it's just like, here we had this, you know, idea for a plot, so, you know, that's what we're gonna do for said plot, which, you know, is fine. You don't have to do everything to be intricate and new and crazy, but it would help if the story was at all interested in playing around with something interesting and something new and exciting and different and going crazy with it. You know, going crazy with it is just something that doesn't get done. It's something where, you know, the plots could play around with, and we could see something new, could see something different. You know, it's just not what a story does, and you know, this one's enjoyable. The performances are fun, and it moves on. We can move on to different things now that it's over, for sure, but it's not necessarily the best thing ever, where you see things. You know, it's, you know, it's one of those, you know, it's everything you know, there's everything that the story can try to be, but it just sort of fails. Overall, I'm going to give Phantasmagoria Part 4 a 7 out of 10. It's good. It's just not that amazing ending that you maybe want in a story like this. That being said, we add the scores and average them out to give Phantasmagoria a final score of 6 out of 10. Bringing this episode of the Ultimate Doctor Who Marathon to a close. Thank you for watching. Please leave a like, comment. Let's get if you know your opinions on the story. Do you agree with me? Do you disagree with me? Subscribe and hit the bell icon so you never miss an upload. And join me next time when we take a look at essentially the first Big Finish audio drama written by Mark Platt. At least the first released audio drama written by Mark Platt, and an audio drama that deals with werewolves in Doctor Who, LOUPS-GAROUX.